It's 9 p.m. here in the French capital. You're watching live from Paris on France 24. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson and these are the headlines. A ruling by Brazil's Supreme Court means that hundreds of convicts are eligible for release from prison, amongst them the former president Lula da Silva. A judge has just ordered him to be released. We expect that to happen very shortly. With another general election looming on Sunday, a poll of polls in Spain suggests that neither the left nor the right is on track for a majority. And with the anti-government protests in Iraq entering their third week, more than a dozen demonstrators are killed during the course of the last 24 hours in Baghdad and in the port city of Basra. Welcome back. Earlier today, lawyers for the former Brazilian president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said they'd filed a request for his release from prison. The 74-year-old was caught up in a massive corruption probe dubbed Operation Car Wash and was put in jail in April of last year. Well, he denies any wrongdoing, but in the last hour or so, we've received a report that a judge has issued a request for Lula's immediate release. This on the grounds that the Supreme Court has changed the rules regarding convicted criminals, meaning they can avoid jail even if they lose a first appeal. Well, for more, we're joined now by Hervé Thierry, who is a professor at the University of São Paulo. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Professor. What exactly has the Supreme Court voted today? And just tell us how it changes how Lula's case is going to be handled.
What they've decided, they changed the rule by which somebody condemned in a second instance could be sent to jail. And now they have decided to come back to the letter of the Constitution and making possible to wait till the last appeal, which could be a long time, and that leads to a fear of impunity. So a judge still can decide to keep them in jail, but as you said, the last hour has changed the situation and possibly Lula is going out.
And not just Lula, but lots of other people affected by this ruling too.
Yes, 5,000 of them could be released, but it depends on the judges. They have not decided to release everyone. He said it's not mandatory now to put them in jail. In each case, a judge can decide to send them to jail or not. But probably a great deal of them would go out of jail, and that puts in jeopardy the fight against corruption. Probably a great many people who have been condemned by the Lava Jato operation could be released shortly. And that is bad news for, good news for the left and the Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Workers' Party, but also probably good news for Bolsonaro, president, because the fear of that party was the mainstay of his election, and so he had his favorite enemy back. So nobody knows what will happen now, but it can be a very tense situation.
And when they say that his Lula's release could be imminent, what sort of a time frame are we talking about, Professor?
It all depended on the judge, but I've been out for the day. I've not heard the last decision. This morning, they would say that the judge, the woman judge, would decide that we're very, very hardline judge. He would probably not release her. So till you told me a few minutes ago that it was decided, I didn't know. So probably if it's confirmed, it's changed. It could be a matter of hours.
Yeah, no, it was confirmed just in the last hour or so that Lula da Silva will be, the judge has issued the order for him to be released. And just one last question for you, Professor. I mean, one of the things that we understand is that given that former President Lula da Silva has got a criminal conviction, his chances of making a return to mainstream politics are jeopardized, aren't they? He can't now run for office again, can he?
It all depends, because he has lost the first case, the one about an apartment, about a flat close to the sea. There are 6 more to come. One about rural property in the field and another to follow. So he has probably avoided the first case, but many more to come.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Professor Hervé Théry, a professor at the University of Sao Paulo and also from the CRNS here in Paris. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as Spain gears up for the 4th general election in 4 years on Sunday, a poll of polls for the El País newspaper suggests that neither the left nor the right will win a majority. Well, it is hoped that the vote will break the long-standing stalemate in the country, but instead, it appears that the Spanish political landscape could end up becoming even more complex. That's because the far-right Vox party could be on track to make gains and emerge as the 3rd largest parliamentary group. Well, here's what Spain's caretaker Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez had to say.
Facing instability and blockage, you must bet on a strong government. Facing a far-right government, you need to bet on a progressive government. Facing extremists, you must bet on a moderate government. Whoever wants moderation, progress, stability, and strength in their government, the only option is the Socialist Party.
Pedro Sánchez, the caretaker Prime Minister of Spain. A little earlier, I spoke to France 24's Sarah Morris in Madrid, who told us more what might come out of these elections on Sunday.
That poll of polls from El País says that there's a 60% chance that neither the left or the right-wing parties, the blocs as they're currently conceived, could make that magic number of 176. And that means that Spain's current political parties are going to have to be more creative with their pacts. At the moment, the Conservative People's Party and the Socialists have categorically ruled out a German-style coalition, but there are voices that are pressing them to come to some sort of understanding, even if it's just one of those parties allowing the other to govern with some kind of consensus on laws that could be passed. We've heard, for instance, the former Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, Conservative, on a stage with Felipe González, the former Socialist Prime Minister, talking about the need for what they described as uncomfortable coalitions.
Okay, and not a lot of enthusiasm either about these elections. Of course, the second time this year, Spaniards are being asked to get up and go to the polling stations. Looks like the turnout might not end up being too high, Sarah.
That's right. Some pollsters saying that it could be as high abstention as 35%. That traditionally in Spain hurts left-wing parties. But I have to say that I've heard elderly Conservative voters, traditional voters of the PP, also saying to me that they can't be bothered to turn out on Sunday either. So it may be that all parties across the board are hurt in some way by that abstention. And with 35% of people undecided, this will be a very volatile poll. We've also got the emergence of yet another 2 political parties that the pollsters say could take seats. Mas País, which is a left-wing party. We've also got another Catalan independence left-wing party in the form of the CUP. Those 2 parties that could add more uncertainty to what is already a very fragmented parliament. And we know that from Monday, difficult horse trading will go on to try to avoid Spaniards returning yet again to the polls.
France 24's Sarah Morris reporting from Madrid. Now to Hong Kong, where what began as a candlelit vigil for a student who died during a pro-democracy rally quickly spiraled into street fires, bursts of tear gas and clashes between protesters and the police. Well, the focal point of today's violence was on Kowloon's Nathan Road. Well, ever since June, the former British colony has been rocked by what's turned into its worst political crisis in decades. France 24's Jean-Émile Jamin has more.
Flowers, candles, and messages of condolence. In vigils across the city on Friday, Hong Kong residents paid homage to the first victim of the protests. 22-year-old Chow Tse-lok died from his injuries in hospital, days after plummeting from the upper floor of a parking garage. Law enforcement officials haven't ruled out that he may have been running from tear gas fired by police. However, they have also denied any foul play.
There are accusations that police officers chased after the man before his fall. We must clarify that it is certainly false.
The death marked a grim turning point in Hong Kong. The impact was immediate, with people taking to the streets, paying tribute and calling for justice. At the University of Science and Technology, where Chow studied, students held a minute's silence. As for protest leaders, they want answers.
I do wish the Hong Kong government would realise that an independent investigation into police operations is necessary now. And reforming the Hong Kong police force has become a big demand in society. Obviously, the Hong Kong police force has to be accountable for Chow's death. They are related to the case.
His death is bound to intensify anger in the Chinese territory. Demonstrations first began in June, when the government tried to introduce a bill to extradite criminals suspects to mainland China, before caving into the protesters' demands and withdrawing it. Since then, the protesters have widened their mandate, calling for, among other things, an inquiry into claims of police brutality.
Now, as anti-government protests in Iraq entered their third week, more than a dozen demonstrators are reported to have been killed during these last 24 hours in the capital Baghdad and also in the southern city of Basra. These latest fatalities bring the death toll to approximately 300 since the first protests erupted. Well, despite the dangers of doing so, thousands of people this evening flocked to the heart of the protests in Baghdad's Tahrir Square. France 24's Luke Schrago tells us more.
Gunfire and panic in the streets of Baghdad, a scene that's become all too common across Iraq after public anger boiled over at the beginning of last month.
We call for reforms, security, good living conditions for all citizens in Iraq. Corruption is rampant everywhere. The security forces are firing live ammunition.
After years of foreign occupation and extremist violence, Iraqis have reached the end of their tether in a nation where 1 person in 5 lives in poverty, and the country ranks as the world's 12th most corrupt. However, security forces cracked down hard almost from the very onset of protests, using both live ammunition and firing tear gas canisters directly at demonstrators with deadly effect. It pushed a mounting death toll towards 300 and Iraq's top Shiite Muslim cleric to speak out in a sermon delivered by a representative during Friday prayers.
It is of great importance to maintain the peaceful nature of all forms of protests, and the big responsibility of achieving this rests upon the security forces by avoiding the use of force.
Concern, too, has risen at the United Nations.
And we call on the authorities to take firm steps towards a meaningful dialogue in Iraq, to take stock of the many grievances, and work with a broad range of actors towards a sustainable resolution to the many challenges Iraq is facing.
That seems unlikely in the short run. While Prime Minister Adel Abdel-Mahdi's position earlier seemed precarious as protesters rejected his promises of handouts for the poor and reforms, he may now have consolidated his position with political allies, who seem determined to support him in the face of demonstrators' demands for a complete political upheaval.
Now, with Lebanon paralysed by political and economic turmoil, thousands of school children there skipped class for a third day in a row today in a show of solidarity with the protest movement, which swept Lebanon these last 3 weeks. Well, those protesting are angered at rampant corruption and they're calling for the ruling political elite to go. France 24's James Wilson has more.
These children should be at school studying. Instead, they've taken to the streets to be part of history, joining the ranks of the mass protest movement that kicked off in Lebanon 3 weeks ago.
We're marching today because none of us wants a high school diploma if we can't get a job with it. All young Lebanese people emigrate to find work because there are no jobs in the country.
In Lebanon, 30% of young people are out of work, according to the World Bank. And the demand for more job opportunities and better work conditions is an important demand to the protest movement. And the anger on the streets is as fierce as it was in October. Even the resignation of Prime Minister Saad Harari last week has done little to cool the anger of Lebanese citizens, and thousands are still taking to the streets on a daily basis.
This movement has one goal: to stop the squandering of taxes and theft in the port of Lebanon, which is estimated at billions of dollars a year. We want to stop it and return this port to the rule of the people, not to the rule of the sectarian quotas that made it this way.
The protesters are also demanding the resignation of the entire government and an end to sectarianism in a country so often divided between Sunni and Shiite.
Our main demand at the Interior Ministry here is that we in Lebanon want a secular state, not a sectarian one.
No decision has yet been made as to who should be Lebanon's next prime minister, but in the meantime, the protesters are attracting ever more people to their cause.
Now, firefighters in eastern Australia are battling a series of massive bushfires, which have forced evacuations in several areas. The authorities are calling the situation, and I quote, unprecedented, adding that the blazes are out of control. Well, in a massive blow to local wildlife, hundreds of koalas at one New South Wales reserve have been killed. France 24's Jean-Émile Jamin has more.
Helicopter footage showing the blaze inching ever closer to this home in New South Wales. Despite bushfires being a common occurrence in the region, Friday's flames saw a spread of roughly 1,000 kilometres, an unprecedented fight now facing fire services.
Unfortunately, we are in uncharted territory this afternoon. We've never seen this many fires concurrently at emergency warning alert level. We've got 90 fires burning across New South Wales. 50 of them remain uncontained.
Over 1,000 firefighters have been deployed, as well as 70 aircraft. Scorching weather and strong winds have not helped in containing the blaze, with persistent drought also adding to the destruction. In some suburbs of Queensland's Sunshine Coast, residents have been told to leave immediately, but for others, shelter is now the only option, the fire blocking any exit routes.
With the wind at lunchtime has picked up again, so yeah, I think it's all sort of a bit out of hand at the moment.
My car's packed, ready to go. I'll make a judgment call. I might be out of here in 10 minutes, I might be out of here in half an hour, I'm not sure.
Scientists have predicted a tough fire season ahead, and with water shortages, this is set to provide yet another challenge to Australian services. By Friday, no fatalities had been reported, but with several buildings destroyed, the damage is far from over.
Now, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been holding talks in Berlin today with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. This on the eve of commemorations marking the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Well, in the build-up to those events, Pompeo unveiled a statue of the late US President Ronald Reagan in the very spot where Reagan delivered a famous speech in 1987 in which he called on the then Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev to, and I quote, tear down this wall. Well, today, Chancellor Merkel expressed gratitude to the United States for helping Germany achieve reunification. The France 24 team has this report about those who fled the communist East in search of a better life in the West.
All he has left from his life as a citizen of East Germany are a few photos and letters exchanged with a French woman met in the communist state.
When I got this postcard from Marseille, I couldn't believe it. For me, it was simply fantastic.
Thilo Lindner was 18 when he fled the East German dictatorship, a few days before the Berlin Wall fell. He went to Cologne, then Stuttgart, where he found a job, started a family, and made a place for himself in a homeland that was both familiar and new, thanks to the solidarity of West Germans.
Everywhere in West Germany, people were interested in us. They gave us clothes. They gave us money. We had help everywhere, in everyday life and at work.
And so in 2015, when 1 million refugees flowed into Germany, Thilo Lindner didn't hesitate for a second. He got involved in helping refugees, first in his company, then in the Regional Chamber of Commerce. He helped set up a welcome center, career counseling, language lessons, and discussion groups. All of it is here to make life easier for asylum seekers in Stuttgart. Casimir was helped all along his journey by Thilo.
The fact that he's lived through this himself obviously affects him. To see people in the same situation he was in.
People come here, they don't have jobs, they don't speak German yet, they don't have all the advantages that I had. So to help them is just a way of me giving back. And in return, I get a lot of gratitude, and I learn a lot too.
Since 2015, the ties that bind have gotten ever tighter between this old refugee and the new ones. Thanks to his commitment and that of thousands of other Germans, a quarter of the refugees who came then have since found a job.
Well, do join us tomorrow morning for special coverage of those commemorations of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here on France 24, we'll have coverage right the way through the morning, including a special report by my colleague Catherine Nicholson, which goes to air at 8:15 Paris time tomorrow.